Welcome, welcome, everybody. Please take your seats. I'm very happy to see all of you here. It's actually the first time after Corona that we have been doing events in this kind of setting. We had events, but then exhibition openings and stuff. So it's lovely to see all of you here. My name is Arjon Dunnewind. I'm the director of IMPAKT. That's where you are, Center for Media Culture. Most of you might know us from the IMPAKT Festival, a festival that we organize annually, but we have a full program year-round focusing on how media and technology change our lives, our world, our democracies. And we're looking at that through the lens of the arts, so inviting artists to show their work, their films, their exhibitions, but also we invite people from science, journalism, etc. We're very happy to have here as our guest in an event that we organized together with them, FOTODOK and also Effect Lab, the curators of this evening. And without any further ado, I would like to hand over the microphone to Daria from FOTODOK.
Thank you, Arjen, and good evening, everybody. My name is Daria Tuminas, and I'm the curator at FOTODOK, which is an exhibition space for photography here in Utrecht, in fact, located just across the street at Nieuwe Langestraat 7, and also, of course, to be found in the digital space and preferably on Instagram, FOTODOK.nl. What we do, we try to work with subjects that are relevant for our society today and do it with artists that predominantly work with the photographic medium, amongst others. And it is a pleasure to welcome you all today at this evening that, as Arjen mentioned, we co-organized and Effect Lab curated. And I would like to keep my part super short and just introduce Dr. Natalie Dixon, who is here and who will moderate the evening tonight. So Natalie is the founder and cultural insights director at Effect Lab, which is a women-led creative studio research-based practice in Amsterdam that she also leads together with Claesien van der Zandschulp, an interactive artist and creative director at Effect Lab. So I also have to mention a personal note. I've been in the conversation with Natalie and Claesien for over a year about their amazing project, How to Tell a Herstory. And we've been ping-ponging some ideas back and forth, and I even had the joy and privilege to take part in their workshops. One of them took part at FOTODOK, and a series of workshops happened at the Warkamer here in Utrecht. One of the speakers tonight will be talking about it more. So it is a big pleasure for me tonight to see kind of the discourse coming together and to also join you as the audience, sit back, relax, and enjoy the talks that will unfold. So I will pass my microphone to Natalie, and she will also further introduce the speakers. So thank you and enjoy.
Thanks, Daria. It's always wonderful to work with partners who are so passionate about people and projects. It's quite rare, actually, for someone to go so deep and personal on things. I was trying to say how amazingly grateful I am for your input, your passion, and your dedication to this project and your presence, and always asking the right questions and being there for the support. I just want to thank you. We are very grateful to FOTODOK and to you personally. So I'm also very excited to be here tonight. It's fun to be in the company of co-thinkers and people who are passionate about the same topic. And of course, the topic is Herstories. And we're going to be at the crossroads of artificial intelligence or AI, algorithms, and photography. This is something I'm very passionate, and I think it comes from a very personal place. And I wanted to start off a little bit by saying, and maybe I could ask Yannick to go back to this first slide. Merci. That this is my maternal grandmother. She's now also the poster person for this event. She's never been on the internet, but suddenly she's everywhere on the internet. She's on all the social media campaigns, and she's the poster. And when she died, she left me her photo album, many photo albums, and this picture really struck me. It was, I think, what cultural theorist Roland Barthes says, a picture that really pierced my heart, and it kind of bruised me. I think he described his own experience of seeing a picture of his mother shortly after her death, and it was a picture of her as a young child, and he said, it was so poignant for me, it almost punctured my heart. And I feel the same about this image. Oh, and I didn't mention her name, Maria Julia Serra. So you can see it's kind of an effective moment. It's always like where emotions and archives meet. It's a very personal space for me. So now, for this evening, which of course has a wonderful affective archive at its heart, many different forms, many different speakers. May I ask you to go to the slide, Yannick or Clecine? Yeah, thanks. With all the different speakers. I'm so excited. This is that moment where you can get into the heads of brilliant people. The first will be Babusi. He worked with us on how to tell a Herstory. And I'm going to give you a little bit of context for this project before he starts. And then I'll have a short chat with Ebru Aydin, who is a critical part of our project too. We will have a short break after that. No, Nirit first. We will speak about her upcoming documentary, Moeders, which in English is Mothers. And then we'll have a break, and then we'll speak and hear Cigdem Yuksel, and her project is called Moslima. And we'll all get together at a panel at the end, and then you're welcome to ask questions. So feel free to do that. There'll be various ways that you can ask questions. Yeah, I must say that it's good to note that one presentation will be in Dutch. So if you only speak English, we have a handout. So you will be able to read the English notes alongside. So we got you, don't worry. Here and there'll also be some clips in Dutch. And we will fill in the gaps for you. And if you have questions, feel free to ask. So now on to the project, How to Tell a Herstory. This is a project that I like to think started in a personal place, but then went very quickly to a collective place. And I work part of Affect Lab with my partner, Clecine van der Zandschulp. Maybe you want to just wave so everyone knows Clecine. And Taya, Annalie, and Elisa are here as well in the front row. We all work together. And we produced this project over the last 2 years. It has various components. One is a tool, which Babusi is going to tell you all about. And the next is a series of workshops, which I think is one of the most critical components. And the workshops are a space for women to share stories with each other, to bear witness and celebrate their experiences. And they took place in Utrecht at the Voorkamer. And we have Salma Fayed here from the Voorkamer. And we want to say thank you to you for organizing and making that so special. And Shay Raviv and your mother as well, who cooked such delicious lunches, made it so festive. Yeah, and as you can tell from all my thanks, this is a very collective project. So this is how we like to work, with many partners and people who we value and are influenced and shaped by. And How to Tell a Herstory is an effort to unarchive stories that are sometimes hidden, not often heard, and are eclipsed by more dominant stories. And we have specifically targeted migrant women in this regard. So we have reached out to the asylum seeker community, to refugees, and other women who have stories to tell that are not often heard, whether in their family circles or in their own community. So this is a chance for women to get together. There is a tool that they use. There is a workshop, which is brilliantly led by Ebru. And then, of course, you bear witness to people's experiences. And these are very poignant stories. They can be very emotional. And they're very meaningful. It says something also about the very humble family photo album and what happens when it is intersected with technology. So people are asked to bring a photo to the workshop. It can be more than one. And then it is analyzed by the tool that we have custom built. And it prompts people into a storytelling process. And at the end, they tell their stories. And it's very beautiful to witness and quite moving. So much the same way as when I almost cry when I see the picture of my grandmother. In these workshops, a lot of people are, moved by others' stories. So it's quite wonderful. This is the heart of the project. If you want to see some of the stories that were produced, you can go to telaherstory.org. So that is a small introduction to how to tell a herstory. Hopefully I haven't forgotten anything. And I would like to now introduce our first speaker for the evening, Babusi and Nyoni. And I like this personal note that Daria started, so I will add my own. The first time we met Babusi was in Johannesburg in 2019. Klasine and I were there for a digital innovation festival called Fakugezi. And Babusi was there. We were immediately struck by how brilliant he was as a creative technologist and how he thought in radical and different ways. And we just wanted to immediately work with him. So we invited him as a collaborator for our project. He helps think with us. We developed the first non-commercial machine learning tool that recognizes and understands vernacular photography. He will unpack that. And besides that, he's also a wonderful DJ and an e-health entrepreneur in a company called Sila Health, which he runs in sub-Saharan Africa with mobile health applications, which is also very impressive. So he's a person with many talents, many skills. Please give it up for Babusi and Nyoni.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to, as the gentleman earlier mentioned, one of the first events post-COVID. He had Impact, and thank you, Impact, for having us. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, even though it was off the cuff. You did really well. Thank you. My name is Babusi, and I am responsible for the technical aspects of how to tell a herstory. And I think some of you might be wondering how I got into this project outside of my capabilities and whatnot. And I think what you might benefit from is some background on my career. So I started off working in tech, and I got into machine learning or artificial intelligence around 2016. And one of the first things I did was use machine learning at the intersection of the needs of displaced people within sub-Saharan Africa. And post that, I started making a career for myself at the intersection of what machine learning can do and the needs of underrepresented communities, which oftentimes are people in what can be termed the global south, oftentimes women, sometimes people in the global south who are also women. And working on this project for me was, I think, a culmination of all my motivations career-wise. And the project, in my experience of it, is a conversation, or let me say multiple conversations between images, people, and machines, but in different ways. And one of the first things that I think we used to establish our research was how humans communicate with images, like pictures. And one of the first examples, I think actually I want to start with this quote from this art critic, the British art critic, John Berger, who, speaking on the male gaze, marked how women were perceived as objects in typically paintings, like the nude woman in a painting, for example, was very much objectified. And then he also spoke to how over time, women were socialized to be perceived as objects in images. And then now, when it comes to photographs of migrant women specifically, and specifically speaking on this project, I think this is something that Natalie discovered. The way that migrant women perceived themselves in these photos, or were presented in these photos, was sometimes, putting them in the back foot of on the back foot of stories of displacement and movement and integration, and actually oftentimes completely omitted from those narratives. So this project, I think, wanted to look at how we actually perceive photos, or how photos maybe communicate to us first, and then start to explore what conversations we could have with the photos. So the first thing I want to talk about is how we as people communicate with images. And one thing that struck me in the research leading up to building the tool was how Renaissance artists would use things like proprioception, which is the performance of the body in an image to convey certain concepts and ideas, and very few things were unintentional in, for example, Renaissance painting. So like elements, like devices, like visual devices, were oftentimes communicating very specific things. And what this was fascinating to me through was the fact that images carry multiple layers of communication that to many different eyes communicate very different things. But then when we move to photographs, it starts to get a little interesting because we as people perceive photographs as truthful by default, which is strange if you consider the fact that a photo is also subjective on the basis of who it was taken by and what they wanted to show you. There's this interesting photo of a collection of gentlemen in my hometown, Bulawayo, in 1983, preparing for a Mativele war. And if you are, for example, a descendant of one of these gentlemen, some of them are from Canada, some of them from the US, this could be a photo of, you know, your great-grandfather on his endeavors in Southern Africa, where for me it, you know, communicates something completely different, but then it is objectively just a photo, but at the same time that framing, you know, it starts to complicate the relationship between, you know, what is truth and what isn't. And in understanding that, we started to think about how we could maybe use machines to understand photos in an objective way. And the tool, or I guess the technology that we decided to use to uncover this is called computer vision, which is basically a subset of artificial intelligence, which deals with the way computers see images. And oftentimes what computers see are just plain pixels, and then what they, I guess, can identify is oftentimes something that is trained by another human, which starts to bring its own set of problems in terms of how subjective it is for us to, for example, classify what is a happy photo, what is a sad photo, or even more objectively, what is, you know, this gender or that gender. So what has also been documented over time is how, due to the lack of representation in a lot of these rooms, and I'm sure a lot of you know, as you can also see from this photo, you know, these machines struggle to identify people who did not build them. So we got into this project knowing fully well the limitations of platforms like machine learning, and also seeing opportunities for us to build our own models that are trained to be inclusive by default. And I did a pretty sneaky thing last week. I found this amazing photo of the team here at IMPAKT, and I ran a machine learning program to just gauge what we think their emotions are, right? So this is using a machine learning model that tries to estimate someone's expression. So according to machine learning, right, if you remember the faces, okay, so this face, we can agree that this is a happy face, right? Right? Or not. I think the face over there, the second face could be a little neutral. How do we feel? Do we feel like these estimations are correct? Yes? Okay. It's consensus across the board. The machine is accurate right now in trying to estimate expressions. But then when machines move to more subjective territory, like age, for example, then it starts to get a little murky, right? So I'd asked, I think this is C. Person C, if this age was accurate, 27-year-old female, and she said it's not, but it was a machine-generated compliment, so it was fine. But I think what I wanted to illustrate here was how, with the same model, there are things that we as humans can accept as an absolute truth, or at least like be as close to objectivity than we have in this case, where we're now asking machines to make estimations on things that, you know, are very gray and oftentimes are inaccurate. And what we then started to look at is how we can maybe communicate with machines in order to better extract stories from photographs. And what this basically was for us was working with the limitations that machines present, and also looking at how we can maybe work with the right parameters to basically ask the right questions. We'd be able to hopefully start to extract the parameters that are as close to objectivity from photos that would allow us to start to have conversations with photos in communion with machines. And what this looked like is this. So this is the How to Tell a Herstory website. And what I'm going to do for you now is just briefly give you a walkthrough of what the tool sees when it sees a photo. So we have this photo from Natalie. We have Natalie's entire family album in the team, by the way, so we're basically family members now. So we have this photo. So the first example I'm going to show you is what the image classification model sees. So image classification is basically a machine trying to understand what a photograph is of. So it's not trying to identify things, it's just trying to understand what the photo is of. And you will see here, I want to dock that the classification model that we use is MobileNet. It's a community-led set of machine learning models specifically around image classification. So what this model sees is that this photo in its entirety could be a groom or bridegroom, but the confidence level is, it's not as high as it could be. So it's making an estimation, but then at the same time, it's not entirely confident, which I think is why we are doing this project, right? Because this is a machine trying to, with its limited understanding of images, classify something. But then we move to more confident models like object detection, which is a model that allows you to pick apart specific elements within a photo and let you know what you're seeing. And our object detection model would pick up that rectangle on the extreme left is a car, for example. It can see people, and it can also see a tie, strangely, on the man's chest. And then another model that we use, which you just saw now with the team members, is an emotion estimation model. And this one gives us an idea of how people feel. So a lot of these parameters that I'm describing are very technical. And I think you might be anxious as to what this experience might look like for someone who's trying to tell a Herstory on the website. And fortunately, what it actually is, given the fact that it's, you know, us having a conversation with machines, it's very conversational. So these are actual prompts from the tool that a user would see that match directly with what we're picking up from a photo. So we have taken these multiple machine learning models and basically created a way to communicate what machines see with participants of this project. And the participation itself is also not as technical as this sounds. It's actually a very wholesome experience that is curated and hosted by Affect Lab in collaboration with Ebru, who will be speaking later about how she has been facilitating these workshops. And it's a very intimate process of storytelling and conversation between people and machines and photos. And just thinking about where we'd like to take this. So there's this quote from a paper written by Mariana Kosovic et al. That looks at the importance of image classification for archival purposes. And if we don't digitize photos and categorize them, then it becomes infinitely harder for us to catalog information. And that cataloging in this era is one of the most important ways or most impactful ways for us to remember history. And what we are setting out to do with How to Tell a Herstory is to build a machine learning model that can classify vernacular photography accurately. So as Natalie described, it is the first tool. I'm not going to try and recite it exactly the way that you said it because it was perfect. But what we want to do is basically build capabilities for machines to read vernacular photography for the first time. And the way that we're doing it is leading with privacy first. So it was actually for a while that if you visited the How to Tell a Herstory website, you wouldn't see any Herstories. Not because they were not being written, but we chose by default to allow people to create these stories for themselves first. And by so doing, we're retaining the intimacy of what it means to extract these stories from these photos and also ensure that what is shared is what people are comfortable to share, and we're also only training this model on publicly shared data. And then we're also building it to be inclusive by default. So this inclusivity for us is building it with migrant women as a basis. So if you look at representation within machine learning, even specifically, by the time that a machine learning model would cater to migrant women or women actually, it would have gone through so many iterations that cater first to, you know, like straight white men and then, you know, and then. So for us, like building it in this kind of inverted way allows us to be inclusive by default. And also, we hope to make it open in terms of what it means for people to be able to create a Herstory, making sure that it's a free and accessible tool for anyone who'd like to have this conversation with machines that helps them unearth so many things that they might not have identified before. Oh yeah, that's the thing that I wrote about what we're building. And I really thoroughly believe that we're, through this project, working with migrant women to teach future machines how to see them and how to understand their joy and their motivations and how, most importantly, they document it all. And in closing, there's this amazing quote by Angela Davis, which I think in looking at how, you know, even our visual is this thread that runs through everything. You know, our histories are ultimately interlinked, and in working on this project, it was also such a revelation for me to realize that a lot of these stories are shared. And yeah, that'll be it from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Babusi. I would invite you just to stay here. We have a few minutes for questions. So if you would like to ask a question, you could either just ask it if your voice is really loud, or I can come around to you with a microphone, or maybe there's a roving mic. That's great. Yeah. Is there anybody who has a question for Babusi about his presentation and the project? Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
We need a mic.
I love how they're like sticklers for it.
Who's the boss?
I was just wondering, is it on? It's on.
Oh yes. Because you rate the emotions by percentage, but you don't with women and men. It's like a woman or it is a man. How do you decide that?
Oh, that's a good question. So we actually had to choose what parameters we'd include in the tool. So for example, that binary representation of gender is not something that we're using. So all we're using is the emotions. So it was just something that I was bringing up to Doc, how machine perception is also imbued with its own biases on like what it means to be like a man or a woman. But there are some objective features like what a smile looks like, for example, that we can use in the same models, basically. Yeah, we don't...
classify for gender.
We don't classify gender. Yeah, but it's an interesting thing to explore still, because it's still part of the same platform. So how do we make use of their strengths and limitations in the most, I guess, productive way? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Petra.
I guess it's a little bit an elaboration on what you were saying when it comes to the gender aspect. Because when you have different cultures, you also have different ways of expressing. So how do you, when people have a smiling face in Western culture, it might mean something else than in other culture. So how do you work with that?
So what we basically do is ask questions. So for the person who's experiencing the tool, we would not present like an absolute truth, like this person is smiling, for example. We will ask questions about emotion and also what happened throughout, at least like the workshops leading up to this point, was a lot of the questions that ended up on the tool as it stands right now were questions that we had to workshop based on feedback from participants on what the machine is actually seeing. So, so to say like this project for me has really been about conversations is mostly that. So a lot of machine assumptions, for example, had to be misproven within the workshops and then integrate again into the tool and have basically improve the quality of the conversations that people are having with the machines.
This is a great photograph, Yannick. If you go back a few slides for Babusi, there was a picture from Özlem. It's her grandmother. There, yes. So in the center, it's Özlem's grandmother, toch? Yeah. And this is her happy face. And so Özlem and I were laughing because she said, this is my grandmother at her happiest. And then we were laughing a little bit because the machine has obviously not read that. But she knows her grandmother intimately and she knows this is her happy face. So we had a laugh. And of course, what Babusi is saying is true. It's a conversation. It's an experiment in that way. So that you can explode some of these thoughts around machine learning. And then you can have a conversation about what kind of quality and register it brings to storytelling. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, yes. One more question. Yes.
Hello, thanks for the talk, first of all. And apologies for missing the first part. Maybe you did talk about that already. I was actually wondering, you mentioned that you used an implementation of MobileNet. So I was wondering what's the data that you used to train the model, and also what were some issues that you ran into during the training phase?
Thank you. So MobileNet is the image classification model. So this is the model that basically tries to understand what a photo is based on looking at it once. So it actually had the most limitations. Did you see the slide? Oh, so there was a slide where I showed what it was identifying in the photo. I think you might have caught that. Where it just saw like a bridegroom or a groom, but then his confidence was, I think, 40-something%. So MobileNet for us is more for fallback model for if we cannot identify any people in a photo, any objects that we can speak to directly, and then there's an assumption that this might be, for example, like a beach scene, you know. So we contemplated training our own model, like using, I'm not sure if you're familiar with like teachable machine, which we could easily integrate into ML5, but then the limitation with that is, you know, what you're asking, like where would we be getting the data from? So right now we're working with, I guess the scope of the project as it stands right now, and then also the limitations of the models. But yeah, I guess to answer your question, so like MobileNet for us was, yeah, it was basically the worst performing model, but then at least like a fallback if we can't see anything in a photo. Yeah.
I want to thank you. We have to move swiftly along. Thank you so much for your talk. Can you please give a warm applause for Babusi? So I'd like to invite Ebru Aydin up. I wonder if we have chairs, or are we supposed to stand slightly awkwardly in the spotlight here? Remco, slightly awkwardly in the spotlight. Okay, all right. Yes. Yes.
I thought we were going to sit.
Yeah, no, but we're also definitely in a spotlight, so that's the plus. Ebru, I want to introduce you first as the moderator and host of the workshops that we had. She is a person who holds space expertly And by this I mean she can really hold a room with people who are in different states of storytelling and emotion. It's really a brilliant skill. Thank you. Thank you. Ebru is also a photographer and the recipient of the Talent Development Award from the Creative Industries Fund, which is quite an achievement. Not many of those are given out, so congratulations. She's also a sociologist by training, and she has her own practice here in Utrecht, and you're working at the Van Gogh Museum at the moment. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, it's all true.
Good. And Ebru was a critical part of the workshops, and I have a few questions for you. So this is really just a Q&A between the two of us, and then we can go into some questions. But I wondered, is there one particular moment that stood out for you in these workshops?
Yeah, I think it's hard to choose because there were four workshops for different groups, and I think different in their ways. But for me, it's the last part of the workshop was like telling the stories to each other. That was like the most beautiful part for me, because then all the stories come together, and you create like a community of women who are recognizing themselves in other stories, reflecting on their own stories, and also sharing like these reflections and insights. And it's like a room filled with love, emotions, and that moments were very warm and lovely for me.
We've just heard from Babusi, and I know that yeah, there you are. There were moments where you and I had a laugh sometimes about some of the things that the machine identified, and other times when it actually really worked. I remember you just mentioned something to me earlier. Maybe you could just recount that for everyone. I thought it was quite interesting.
Yeah, the machine was like, I also used my own example. There was like my mother working in the living room, and it was like an old computer, and it was recognizing as a TV. So it was also fun to see. But in one case, it was like it was a couch in the picture, and the tool was asking questions about the couch. And yeah, there was the story of Julia. And correct me if I'm wrong, the couch was like so obvious thing that it was like not. It was like, yeah, it was there. But then the tool asked a question, and it was like this couch had their own story to tell. And it was like so funny to see like the couch brought so much memories and stories, which were normally, they didn't come up without the tool, I think. So that was like a nice example of like adding value on the stories, because it was recognizing something unusual, but for the person it was like usual.
And you hosted 4 workshops. You're the superwoman of workshops, it seems now. We only came to one of them, and you were at all of them. And I wondered if you noticed some prominent themes that emerged that were worth mentioning or discussing.
Yeah, there were a lot of I think, themes in these workshops. Now, in this picture, you see like moms in relationship or in relation with their daughters was like a theme, but also grandmothers. Love was a theme, but also migration and the difficulties would come with migration. Family ties, struggles, choosing for yourself or choosing for your children and their education, loss. Rest, self-care, it's like a whole range of topics. And I think the similar thing was like, it was about women, and everyone recognized something in the stories of other women. And sometimes it was like emotional and difficult, but other stories were also like warm and
joyful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder how you see this future collaboration. Do you have some hope in the co-authorship of stories between machines and storytellers?
Well, I think this tool really helped women to look different to their archive photos or photos, and I think it's helping to tell the stories more in an inclusive way, or more like looking open to the pictures. So I really loved the tool as a way of storytelling. And I was also curious. You are in 2 workshops, right? What your thoughts were of the workshops?
I must say, Babusi and I are going to have a healthy disagreement about truth. I feel no absolute truth. All of these things are a sea of grey, so many different blurry lines. So I felt there's a lot of these things are, for example, when we discovered people were talking about the tool as a animate being. So the machine is thinking. Somebody said to me, the machine is thinking. And or he is thinking. That was really interesting as well. That there's a kind of liveliness around technology, and then people were in this relationship with this thing that was lively. I thought that was really interesting. I also thought that it was very important for people to bear witness to each other's stories, and that it wouldn't have happened if there was just a tool. It had to have a workshop. It had to be both of them. Yeah.
And I hope that also the workshops created more like a community with this woman, but also the safe space to share the stories. Because you can make the story in this tool, but then the sharing part is also very valuable. I think what is adding in the workshop.
I am looking to see if we have time for questions. Unfortunately not. I'm going to save this till later. Thank you so much, Ebru.
Thank you too.
We have a 15-minute break now, so please feel free to grab a drink or take some fresh air outside. And then after this, we're going to hear from Cigdem Yuksel about her project Moslima. So please join us after that. Enjoy. Thanks for being so prompt and coming back. I hope you had some fresh air and maybe a drink, and you're rejuvenated for our next speaker, who will speak in Dutch. So if you need a handout for a translation, please raise your hand and you will receive a handout. So there's an English translation. Olga will hand these out, and in the meantime, I will introduce Cigdem Yuksel. I recently had the privilege of meeting Cigdem and was introduced to her project with the Affect Lab team, and it's called Moslima. It is a very urgent project. It looks at the representation of Muslim women, specifically in image banks, and specifically the IMPAKT image bank here in the Netherlands. I think this is a very brave project. And when you do such brave projects, you have to have a lot of determination and a lot of grit. You have to be a very particular person to do a project like this. So I honor you for having that kind of grit and determination, and also for asking very difficult questions. This is what is absolutely necessary, because there's a lot at stake in a project like this. So I'd like to welcome Cigdem Yuksel for her presentation, Moslima.
Hello everyone. Sorry, I'm gonna switch over to Dutch. I hope the handout will help you a little bit. Ik ben Cigdem Yuksel. Ik ben fotograaf. En sinds kort onderzoek ik eigenlijk ook dingen, beeldonderzoek. En 2 jaar geleden heb ik mijn onderzoek gepubliceerd, Moslima. En dat gaat over de representatie van moslima's in de beeldbank van het ANP. En dat onderzoek is eigenlijk ontstaan uit frustratie. Ik heb zelf een Turkse achtergrond. Ik ben islamitisch opgevoed. En al mijn hele leven zie ik foto's van gesluierde vrouwen, van moslima's, vaak in hele specifieke stereotyperende contexten, maar ook op een stereotype wijze op foto's zelf. En ik vroeg mezelf af, als fotograaf, wat kan ik doen eigenlijk om dat beeld te veranderen? Maar voordat ik antwoord geef op die vraag, dacht ik, wat wordt er eigenlijk aangeboden? Welke foto's worden er eigenlijk allemaal gemaakt? En wat wordt er eigenlijk aangeboden aan de Nederlandse media? Dus ik ben een onderzoek gestart. Ik heb 3 periodes onderzocht, van elke keer 5 jaar. Verspreid over een periode van 30 jaar. En in totaal heb ik bijna 4.500 foto's van moslima's geanalyseerd. Ik heb gekeken wat zien we op de foto's, maar ook welke woorden en welke omschrijvingen worden aan deze foto's toegevoegd. En ik wil jullie allemaal vragen bij het luisteren en het zien van deze presentatie om iets in het achterhoofd te houden, om ook over na te denken. Welke rol spelen algoritmes en al deze woorden en al deze foto's straks in de toekomst, in de toekomstige beeldbanken, of hoe media in de toekomst zullen werken, waarin algoritmes ook steeds meer een belangrijkere rol beginnen te krijgen. Nou, in totaal dus bijna 4.500 foto's geanalyseerd, 7 fotografen geïnterviewd over hun werkwijze. En daarvan zal ik een aantal resultaten met jullie delen. Nou, hoe werkt de beeldbank van het ANP? Eigenlijk heel simpel. Als fotograaf upload je je foto's in de beeldbank en het is aan jou welke woorden je toevoegt aan deze foto's. Dus ik heb gekeken naar de zoekterm Moslima en als je Moslima intikt, dan krijg je alle zoekresultaten van foto's die gekoppeld zijn aan deze woorden, aan deze woord nu. Nou ja, dit is een screenshot van een aantal resultaten, maar het ANP heeft echt duizenden en duizenden foto's. Dit is er een voorbeeld uit. Er zijn natuurlijk ook wel andere foto's te vinden, maar dit soort foto's heb ik geanalyseerd. Een van de resultaten is dat ik van die 4.500 foto's heel veel foto's heb gezien van gesluierde vrouwen. Heel veel foto's, eigenlijk onevenredig veel foto's van vrouwen in een niqab. We weten in Nederland dat slechts een aantal, slechts 250 tot 300 mensen, vrouwen, een niqab dragen. En als je naar de percentage kijkt, dan zijn er echt heel veel foto's te vinden van vrouwen in een niqab. En slechts een klein percentage van vrouwen zonder hoofddoek. Nou, hiernaast een onderzoeksresultaat waarin je eigenlijk kan lezen dat dit percentage veel genuanceerder ligt in werkelijkheid. Wat mij gelijk, de vraag die wat bij mij opkwam was, volgens mij zijn er veel meer, ook heel veel moslima's zonder hoofddoek, die we niet gerepresenteerd zien in de beeldbank. 94% van de foto's, daar zag ik dus de moslima's buitenshuis, voornamelijk lopend, over straat, winkelend, op de markt of in het OV. Slechts 3% binnenshuis, voornamelijk gefotografeerd, elk jaar weer dezelfde foto's van een gezin wat thuis de iftar aan het verbreken is. En nauwelijks foto's van moslima's die aan het werk zijn, slechts 3%. Sporten 2% of een culturele instelling bezoeken 1%. En als ze al aan het werk zijn, dan zijn het vaak cashiers, schoonmaaksters of basisschoolleraressen. Nou ja, dit hebben jullie eigenlijk net ook al een beetje op de foto's gezien. Dus het zijn voornamelijk straatfoto's wat ik heb gezien, waarbij vrouwen voorbij lopen, staan, zitten of in een parkje zitten. Dit soort foto's. Vaak van veraf genomen, onherkenbaar, op afstand gefotografeerd. Eigenlijk kan je je niet echt identificeren met ze. Ja, wat zien we niet? Nou ja, dit soort foto's. Foto's die ik eigenlijk ken vanuit mijn eigen omgeving. Mijn moeder, mijn zusje, mijn vriendinnen die dokters zijn, studeren, vrijwilligerswerk doen, leiding geven, hun kinderen helpen met het huiswerk maken, hun moeder bezoeken in een verzorgingshuis. Ja, zoals deze foto's. Dit zou ik graag willen zien. Dit zijn dan foto's van Getty Images. Een vloggende vrouw, helpen met huiswerk maken, met vriendinnen in een café, met collega's iets bespreken wat te maken heeft met je klant. En waarom is dit problematisch? Het ANP is het grootste persbureau van Nederland. 95% van de Nederlandse media maken gebruik van de diensten van het ANP. Niet alleen de beeldbank, maar ook nieuwsberichten. En door dit soort foto's eigenlijk aan te bieden, eenzijdige fotografie aan te bieden, draag je indirect ook bij aan eenzijdige beeldvorming van deze groep vrouwen. Waar ik ook naar heb gekeken zijn de tags en de bijschriften. als je op zoek gaat naar een foto, dan kan je bij elke foto de informatie zien die bij deze foto hoort. Dus als fotograaf is het aan jou om een omschrijving toe te voegen aan de foto. Dat ziet er dan ongeveer zo uit. Het verschilt heel erg. Een paar zinnen of een hele lap tekst met heel veel woorden. En de bedoeling is dat dit feitelijke omschrijvingen zijn. Hier zie je een aantal percentages van woorden die best wel vaak voorkomen in omschrijvingen van moslima's. Dus moslim, hoofddoek, burkaverbod 16%. Maar ook islamisering bij 12% van de foto's. En veel inburgering en integratie. Dit is een voorbeeld. Je ziet hier eigenlijk een gesluierde vrouw op een fiets voorbij fietsen. Voorbij verkiezingsposters. En we zien dat de fotograaf eigenlijk de vrijheid heeft genomen om associatief eigenlijk woorden toe te voegen. Dus de onderstreepte woorden, allochtoon, integratie, integrering, inburgering, heeft eigenlijk feitelijk gezien niets met deze foto te maken. Want deze vrouw is niet aan het inburgeren. Deze vrouw zit niet in een lokaal waarin ze een inburgeringscursus doet. Zij fietst gewoon voorbij. Hallo. Nog een foto van een vrouw in een burka op straat. En hier zie je ook immigratie, Koran, integratie. Terwijl je feitelijk gezien zou kunnen zeggen, een vrouw in burka loopt over straat in die stad. En ook hier weer burgemeester Abu Talib die het vaste verbreekt met buurtgenoten. En daar worden ook enorm veel woorden toegevoegd door de fotograaf als integratie, islamisering, migranten en zelfs sharia. Ik heb 7 fotografen geïnterviewd en ik heb ze dus eigenlijk gevraagd van hoe kom je nou tot die omschrijving en waarom voeg je deze woorden toe aan de foto wat er feitelijk gezien niet bij past. En de meeste fotografen zeiden dat ze zoveel mogelijk woorden proberen toe te voegen aan de foto om de foto vindbaar te maken in het zoeksysteem van het ANP. Dus als je deze woorden niet toevoegt, dan zijn je foto's bijna onvindbaar. Want welke beeldredacteur gaat zoeken op vrouw loopt over straat? Ja, daar heb je miljoenen foto's van in de beeldbank. Dus je probeert heel specifiek, eigenlijk heel associatief. Ja, dan maar allochtoon, dan maar integratie. Want dan heb je nog een kans dat een beeldredacteur op je foto komt en hem misschien wel koopt. Dus een commercieel aspect. Ja, dit is natuurlijk problematisch omdat deze vrouwen in een frame worden gestopt waar ze eigenlijk niet in horen. Het bevestigt het stereotype beeld. Het bevestigt eigenlijk het stereotype beeld van de moslima die onderdrukt is, die moet integreren, die slecht Nederlands spreekt, die gered moet worden. En dat sijpelt eigenlijk zo door in woorden in de beeldbank. Gelukkig zijn er ook beeldbanken die het goed doen. Getty Images is een internationaal beeldbank. En zij hebben een aantal jaar geleden zijn zij in samenwerking aangegaan met muslimgirl.com. En zij zijn actief samen beelden gaan maken die een wat positiever beeld laten zien van moslima's. Dus als je moslima intikt, dan kom je op dit soort foto's. Wat gevarieerder is dan het aanbod van het ANP. Ja, dat onderzoek is gepubliceerd. Daar hebben wij een tweedelige podcast over gemaakt, Moslima. Dat zullen jullie aan het einde van de slides ook zien. Zal ik naar verwijzen. Maar ik ben inmiddels ook een tweede onderzoek gestart. En daar ben ik nu heel erg druk mee bezig. Ik weet inmiddels wat er aangeboden wordt in de beeldbanken. Ik weet welke woorden eraan worden toegevoegd. Maar ik was ook benieuwd wat voor foto's van gesluierde vrouwen ziet de gemiddelde krantenlezer eigenlijk al 20 jaar in Nederland. Een andere onderzoeksvraag, maar ook iets wat inzicht zou geven in het fotogebruik en beeldvorming als het gaat om deze vrouwen. Ik ben de NRC, Telegraaf en de Volkskrant aan het onderzoeken tussen 2000 en 2020 en elke keer sla ik een jaar over. En hoe we te werk gaan is, ik heb 2 stagiairs en de afgelopen maanden zijn wij heel veel in de Koninklijke Bibliotheek geweest. Hebben we alle kranten doorgespit, want daar is het klantenarchief. En elke keer als we een foto van een gesluierde vrouw zagen, hebben we dat gefotografeerd. En dat ben ik nu dus allemaal aan het invoeren. En hopelijk wordt dat dus het onderzoek. En dat ziet er zo uit. Ja, heel veel werk. Ik ben nu de data aan het invoeren. En wat me eigenlijk nu al opvalt, maar dat kan ik nog niet met zekerheid zeggen. Heel veel foto's van gesluierde vrouwen zijn geplaatst bij berichten over het buitenland. Het zijn ook foto's die in het buitenland zijn genomen. Heel veel foto's van gesluierde vrouwen bij artikelen over Iran, Irak, Afghanistan, Israël en de Palestijnse gebieden en Turkije. En we zien deze vrouwen voornamelijk rouwend, schreeuwend, vluchtend, demonstrerend in vluchtelingenkampen en tussen het oorlogspuin. En ik ben deze foto's ook visueel bij elkaar aan het zetten om te kijken, ja, wat doet dat dan met je als je dat in één keer ziet? Ik had graag een mooi filmpje willen maken, maar ik ben nog helemaal bezig met die foto's bij elkaar zetten. Maar ik zal jullie een eerste impressie geven. De rouwende vrouwen. De demonstrerende vrouwen. De vluchtende vrouwen. Nou, stay tuned. Het onderzoek wordt in oktober 2020 gepubliceerd en ik zal dat ook presenteren in Pakhuis de Zwijger. Dan een ander onderdeel van mijn onderzoek, wat naar aanleiding van het onderzoek van het ANP is ontstaan. Wat mij opviel bij het zien van al deze straatfoto's, is eigenlijk dat ik op heel veel foto's de wat oudere gesluierde vrouw zag, waarvan ik dacht, hé, dat had zo mijn oma kunnen zijn. Waarom zijn er dit soort foto's eigenlijk? Waarom zijn er geen andere foto's van deze generatie te vinden? Wat is er eigenlijk te vinden over de generatie van mijn oma? En in dit geval gaat het specifiek over de eerste generatie Turkse vrouwen. Wat is ons collectief geheugen als we naar beeld kijken? Is die er wel? Dus ik ben... in de media zien we sowieso alleen deze beelden. Dit is het hedendaagse beeld van deze generatie. Maar ook als je in de archieven duikt, vind je ook maar heel weinig foto's. Vaak gaat het over de mannelijke gastarbeiders die hier naartoe kwamen. En de vrouwen die daar achteraan kwamen, maar weinig visueel beeld. Dus we hebben eigenlijk een enorm gat in ons collectief visueel geheugen ook over deze generatie vrouwen. En dat wil ik graag aanvullen, wil ik veranderen. Dat ben ik aan het doen samen met Prospector, productiebureau. Ja, hoe kunnen we ons visueel archief ontsluiten? Hoe kunnen we voor de generaties die na ons komen eigenlijk wel wat meer foto's laten zien over deze generatie? Hoe kunnen we dat verzamelen? Wat ik de afgelopen maanden ook heb gedaan en wat ik de komende maand nog steeds ga doen, is dat ik de eerste generatie Turkse vrouwen in dit geval ben aan het interviewen. Ik ben ze aan het fotograferen, hoe ze er nu uitzien. Beelden van nu, portretten van nu. En ik ben foto's uit familiealbums aan het verzamelen. Dus de foto's die eigenlijk nooit boven water komen drijven en die ook niet in onze openbare historische archieven te vinden zijn. En ik zal een aantal oral history interviews houden met de kinderen en de kleinkinderen. Hoe heb ik dat gedaan? Ja, ik heb eigenlijk gewoon een oproepje geplaatst op Instagram. En daar hebben heel veel kinderen en kleinkinderen op gereageerd. Dit is een voorbeeld van zo'n bezoek. En daar komen dan dit soort verzamelingen uit, zeg maar. Hè. Als je het heden en het verleden naast elkaar legt, wat voor een tijdsbeeld je dan ook krijgt, hè? Ja. Nog een voorbeeld. Ook hier, stay tuned. Volgend jaar, najaar, in het Nederlands Fotomuseum. Wat ik ook aan het doen ben is, we begonnen met de vraag, ik begon met mijn onderzoek naar de beeldbanken, naar de foto's. Welke foto's zien we nou heel veel van moslima's? Maar hoe kan het ook anders? Want als we het gesprek aangaan met zo'n beeldbank als het ANP, dan is er eigenlijk heel weinig ruimte om dingen anders te doen. Dingen gaan nu eenmaal zoals ze gaan. Fotografen moeten nu eenmaal hun foto's verkopen. Ja, dan zet je die woorden er maar bij. Dus er is weinig ruimte om te kijken naar hoe we dat systeem, dat zoeksysteem ook binnen zo'n beeldbank kunnen veranderen. En samen met Prospector organiseren we in het najaar 3 publieksprogramma's voor de beroepsgroep om daar dieper op in te gaan. Hoe kunnen we het systeem van beeldvorming eigenlijk veranderen als het gaat om fotografie? En met die input vanuit de beroepsgroep gaan we zoeken naar oplossingen. En hopelijk kunnen we een pact en richtlijnen opstellen, wat we daadwerkelijk in de praktijk kunnen implementeren. Ja, maar de toekomst. Al deze foto's, al deze woorden die gekoppeld zijn aan deze foto's, al die foto's die we in kranten zien. Wat als dat het enige is wat als input kan dienen voor misschien toekomstige algoritmes voor zoeksystemen? Dan vind ik dat vrij zorgwekkend. En samen met de vrouwen van Affect Lab gaan we eigenlijk op zoek naar, kunnen we misschien een beeldbank van de toekomst ontwikkelen waarin die vooroordelen en die blinde vlekken misschien al aan de voordeur opgevangen kunnen worden? Kunnen we misschien een systeem ontwikkelen waarin de stereotypering en het gebruik van die foto's misschien helemaal niet meer, dat het niet mogelijk is dat je dat in die context gebruikt? Dat is nog een flinke zoektocht, maar het zijn wel interessante vragen. Dit is de tweedelige podcast. Ik raad jullie allemaal aan om er naar te luisteren. Het is een verdieping op de beeldvorming van moslima's en de rol van de media daarin. En hoe kunnen we het systeem veranderen. vpro.nl/moslima. 2 delen met 3 bonusafleveringen. Ben ik binnen de tijd?
Ja.
Wauw.
Ja. Super, super, super. Wow, I say it again, what a powerful project. This is really impactful, very impressive. And also this image of ink-stained fingers going through newspaper archives. You really see the blood, sweat and tears going into this project. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
We have time for a few questions while we're going to bring some chairs out for the panel discussion. So I'll invite the team to do that while we take maybe 1 or 2 questions for Cigdem. Petra.
Vraag ik het in het Nederlands gewoon aan je?
Ja, wat je wil.
Oké, ik vond het super presentatie. Heel veel herkenning met het onderwerp waar ik mee bezig ben. Menopauzevrouwen. Vervang Moslima door menopauze en je hebt basically the same.
Ja.
En wat ik me afvraag, ik heb eigenlijk 2 vragen. 1, je kijkt naar een krantenarchief. Terwijl we weten natuurlijk dat het aantal krantenlezers afneemt. Het zijn hoofdzakelijk mensen van, laten we zeggen, 50 plus, om het zo maar eens even te formuleren. Dat is de ene vraag. Dus kijk je ook naar online media? En de andere vraag is, ik heb gekeken naar menopauze en Getty Image. En ook hoe ze dat op een nieuwe manier verbeelden. En ik werd daar toch een beetje ongemakkelijk van, omdat ik het, zeg maar, de greenwashing variant van stokfotografie vind. Want menopauzevrouwen moeten dan allemaal heel gezellig sporten. Precies. En lachen en weet ik veel. En dit is het ook niet. Dus hoe zit het met het online gedeelte en wat vind je precies van die nieuwe vorm van Getty?
Ja, nou, mijn allereerste opzet van het onderzoek was ook gericht op online. Maar helaas zijn online krantenartikelen met beeld eigenlijk niet meer te achterhalen, omdat er allerlei rechten vastzitten aan het beeld. En het is er niet. Dus toen ben ik maar... Instagram en dat soort TikTok en dat soort online. Ja, dat is sowieso anders. Maar voor mijn onderzoeksvraag, ook omdat ik wilde kijken naar hoe de media gebruik maakt van journalistieke beelden van gesluierde vrouwen. En wat we de afgelopen 30 jaar zien. Ja, dat was wel specifiek mijn focus. En inderdaad, wat je zegt over getty images. Ik denk dat het heel interessant is om met z'n allen het gesprek te voeren over hoe we bepaalde thema's in beeld brengen. Want je bent heel erg afhankelijk van hoe de fotograaf naar de wereld kijkt. En daar zouden we het over moeten hebben.
There is a chance to ask more questions to Cigdem directly and also to the other panelists who I'll now invite to come up and have a seat here. So we can collectively answer and pose questions even to one another. There, okay, so you can join at slido.com. You put this code in, 121314, or scan that QR code, and you can ask questions. I will receive them on my trusty mobile phone here. La la la. And we can ask them directly. So I'm going to take a seat over here. Am I going to see this?
Yes, if somebody puts a question.
There's a microphone there.
Yes. Okay.
Can we have the code back?
There is also the option just to simply ask question the old-fashioned way with a microphone. So maybe someone wants to ask a question that way first while everyone works out Slido. I was wondering, Cigdem, when you met people in their living rooms and they were going through their personal family photo albums, how did they respond to your project? What did they say to you?
Well, in the first place, I had contact with their daughters or their granddaughters, and they already talked with their grandmother about the project. So they already knew what we were going to do there. So they were ready with the photo albums, with their stories, and said to me, well, come next to me, I know what you're going to do. And we just went through the photos and talked about the stories behind it. Yeah.
I saw a lot of joy as well in some of the portraits. There seemed to be genuine joy and celebration happening there.
Yeah, there was not much effort in getting there, in getting in their living rooms and getting them in front of the camera. They were really open about it. And I think also the younger generation is aware of the importance of the, how do I say it? Archiving the stories of their own grandmothers and mothers. So they were enthusiastic, and also the grandmothers were that. So yeah, they were really open.
I wonder also, because I mentioned the beginning of the How to Tell a Herstory project as being something quite personal for me that led to a bigger project. Was there a starting point or a kind of trigger for you to start this project?
Yeah, it was my grandmother, who's not alive. And it's a shame because I would have loved to interview her and to get to know her as an adult, as a young woman. And that was also one of the reasons why I started this, to talk to the women who are still alive now, before they also pass away, and we don't have anything to tell from their perspectives. Yeah.
So we have some questions here. The first one, and I will just open up to anyone here to have a... Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Before we go to Slido, go ahead. Yeah.
I think Nirit said it beautifully. Data is important, and stories as well. It's about balance, right? How do we get the tech guys to events like this so they will improve their knowledge on balancing left and right side of the brain? What do we need to do?
Babusi.
I think the question for me is in the way you actually phrased it. How do we get the tech guys in this room? Like there's a, you hear me? Hi. Sorry. So the question for me is in the way that you actually phrased it. You know, it's really about, you know, why is it tech guys still when we have like just almost like gender parity everywhere else? So representation in the formulation, or at least like initially in the research and the formulation of the technologies, for me is, I think, where the focus should be. But it's unfortunate that at this point we can only talk about how we can get tech guys in the room right now while we work towards what it means to be truly represented in the, I guess, the algorithms that will ultimately control how we experience life. I think, speaking from like a product perspective, you know, inclusivity or inclusion is a win for everyone, right? So I think once we start to frame why it's important to, at least in the beginning from a capitalist perspective, to be able to understand everyone, then ultimately, you know, as it typically does, trickle down to socially what it means for everyone to be seen equally. Yeah, I think that could be the approach. Just, I don't know, speaking to the tech guys and letting them know why it's important to be inclusive, even from purely a product standpoint.
You've never shied away from more radical approaches. You're a self-taught AI expert. And I loved your project about black women's hair. This actually goes to the heart of what we're saying about just doing stuff. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think about a year ago, I worked on a project called blackgirlhair.js, which basically is one of the first, if not the first, model that can accurately classify black women's hairstyles. And the reason why I embarked on this project was, one, of course, to have a way in which machine learning, or at least algorithms, could identify the hairstyles of people who are historically, even presently, extremely underrepresented by the algorithms that they use daily. For a lot of people in the global south, you know, using platforms like Google and whatnot is basically using almost like what are like hand-me-down algorithms. So technology built for people elsewhere that, you know, as someone in Africa, for example, to go onto a platform like Google and say hairstyles for women is to know that that's not going to work, and having to specify hairstyles for black women or something. So that was the first reason why I did it. And then the second reason was to build a model that exclusively catered to the most underrepresented group, technology-wise, and really flipping that bias on its head and exploring conversations around how people who are typically included for are excluded now. You know, I had like male friends or like white friends who try to use the tool and, you know, tell me, well, it's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, imagine how I feel all my life. And exploring how that, I guess, tension for a lot of people for whom that's never been a factor could be a conversation tool when it comes to what it actually means to be represented online, which a lot of people where I'm from are not, and people from here are.
I'm going to move towards this first question. Thank you for your answer, Babusi. Nirit, maybe you can speak to this. Does technology have a bias, and is this caused by the maker or the user? I think this is one of the ever-persistent questions in AI and algorithms. Maybe you can speak to that.
Well, generally, I have the feeling that technology gets right now too much attention, while policy is the problem. So I have the feeling that also in my struggle, especially, for example, with police technology, we're now with a group of lawyers thinking how to attack this beast, and we're afraid to say this algorithm is wrong because they're going to just say, okay, we're going to stop using the algorithm. But the algorithm is not the problem because they're going to find another way to do it. So also answers your question, it's not the tech guys, it's the policy behind the tech. So if we would have a more conscious way of working, if we would have systems of accountability that can check, you know, a kind of a check system on what are those technologies doing, then everything would be okay. So I think that, of course, the technology has biases, like you mentioned nicely. Why are there only tech guys and not tech girls? There needs to be diversity. in the people that are making technology, but the policy is what drives the technology.
And who made the technology behind the 400 list and the 600 list?
So I've interviewed a woman in the police who designed it. She's a psychologist, a forensic psychologist. She works with a team from Nijmegen. The more I looked into the technology, I thought it actually works. It actually works in bringing up names of kids who are in risk. The question is, why is the police doing this? Why is it not Jeugdzorg who has, or that's another dysfunctional organization, but
social work.
Some kind of social organization that could knock on the door and say, do you guys need help? But not a policeman who knocks on the door and says, you know, you have a 10-year-old at home and he's at risk of becoming a criminal, because that doesn't work. So again, I didn't have the feeling that the technology was problematic. I had the feeling that the way it was functioning was problematic.
And I suppose this brings up your point about policy a little closer to this other question about laws. I'm really also interested in the laws around privacy for these kind of projects. They're very sensitive data. But is there a law, any kind of laws that govern database building and algorithmic training? Cigdem, do you know of anything? I mean, do the INPAKT ever say anything about laws or policy around this kind of work?
Not that I know. Not that I know. And I know that they are using now a software of AI to recognize famous people like Queen Maxima. They want to optimize the search engine by when someone is typing in Maxima, it doesn't show the Maxima hospital, but it shows Maxima, the Queen. So I know that they are using that, but I'm not sure in which other ways they use AI. I don't know.
It strikes me that there was an interview actually at the Pakhuis de Zwijger, I think, where you had a direct conversation with, I think it's the director of the INPAKT?
Yeah, 2 years ago it was.
Yeah, and it was a very aggressive conversation, mostly from his side. And I noticed in the way you recount the story that it was quite disturbing for you as well. I imagine that the response from them has not been...
changed.
Okay.
No. No, not.
Yeah.
No, they're really defensive, and they don't want to recognize that Muslim women are misrepresented in the image bank. And my focus are Muslim women, but if we go wider, we see in the image bank that a lot of groups are misrepresented in the image bank, like LGBTQI, people with disabled people, and Asian people with an Asian background. They're actually invisible in the image bank. So there are a lot of things we can do better.
Can we hack the INPAKT data bank?
Shall we do that? Secret operation. Babusi.
Okay, is there anybody else in the audience who has a microphone or would like a microphone to ask a question? Yeah, Petra?
Nobody else has a question. I guess it's...
Go ahead, Petra.
I was just wondering, because we were all talking about technique and is it biased or not, but and a process. But I think it starts with the people, because the people are the starting point of the process and the starting point of the technique. So, whatever way we look at it, there will be a bias because we make the system, right? It's not a question actually, but can you maybe you can respond? You can respond on it, or
like. When we focus on searching tools, like in search engines, and which data we use to train the algorithm, when we look at the AMP, of course, it's already biased because of the pictures they make about people and the words they connect to the photo. And if you use that as information to train the system, it will be biased, of course. So I think that's an uitdaging.
But I think
how can you tackle that?
Your project speaks to the heart of creating more nuance around visual culture and the visual culture of Muslim women in the Netherlands, and also creating a bigger spectrum, right? So we have more to choose from. so that the spectrum is not so narrow.
Yeah, but one of my questions is how do we change the information we are using to feed the algorithms when the image bank has already millions and millions of photos? Like, if we start now, we need a lot of time to feed it with different kind of photos. So yeah, we have to be really aware of it, and we should not use those kind of photos. We should be very selective in how we feed the machine.
I hear a manifesto.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will just pick one more question here. Did you consider using... sorry, I was looking at this last one. Did you encounter criticism, Nirit, this is for you, or resistance in the way you showed the emotional side of data or algorithms?
Resistance from who? I encounter resistance all the time. I just have to choose which story to tell. I think the resistance that I'm sensitive to is from my own community of investigative journalists who, it's still a very masculine territory. And as a woman who works there, I'm kind of cool because I look at the, security trends, and I talk to weapon dealers. And the minute I suddenly make a film like that, it's kind of like, oh no, don't start now doing all these things. Can you go back to, like the cool facts? And I think there is what bothers me, and there is, of course, government's resisting and the police is resisting. I don't think that's the problem. I'm used to that. But I would like to change the atmosphere and the jargon and the understanding in the journalist community. And I think it has to do also with what you're talking about, because you might not be able to change the database, but I work for this eindredacteur who are punching those search words and looking for those sensational images. So I think there needs to be a lot of education in the media level and much more women in this kind of places.
Ebru, you have a question.
Yeah, if I hear you, it sounds like we can just create a new database or new data banks to do it in our own way, because changing the system can be more difficult and also takes a lot of energy, and it takes a long time. Yeah, is that an option? You think?
It's always an option, but the AMP is now the biggest image bank, but also like the biggest visual data bank for AI. So if we start a new image bank, of course it's nice, but if the AMP is going to serve the Dutch media for another hundreds of years and algorithms will play a more and more important role, it's important also that the AMP is more aware of all those pictures and is going to change the words and the descriptions they are connecting to those photos. So, yeah.
I think it's a change has to start in small and very definitive steps, and it also takes collaboration, right? So I'm very pleased to say that we are all collaborating on projects in the future. We're working together, as you said, Cigdem, on a beeldbank van de toekomst, image bank of the future. So that's also very exciting. So yes, Ebru, we're going to try it. We're going to give it a go. Babusi, we are working together on fulfilling the next stage of how to tell a Herstory, which is very exciting. It is a tool that is licensed on Creative Commons. Anyone can use the website and do a workshop. It is free and open for anyone to use. It is an attribution share-alike license, so you can find that on the website. And Nirit, we are working together on Off the Record, which is a forthcoming performative lecture. Very exciting. On that note, I want to thank you all for your presentations tonight and for the very vibrant discussions and questions that you've elicited and put forward and the critical trains of thought that you've engaged with. This has been really, really nourishing. I want to also thank the audience for their attention and your wonderful questions. And of course, stay for a drink. It is open for another hour or so, so you're welcome just to relax, talk algorithmic anxiety and joy, if you like. And thank you so much for being here. It was wonderful. want to say a thank you to Yannick and Remco and the team at Impact for all their amazing support and help. Bram and Jeroen, you're always just so incredibly supportive. And Olga for organizing this today. This was really wonderful. Thanks.